Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
When I went through bad times in my life, I just kept thinking like, well, what could possibly happen next? It was almost like I had moments where I was just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And one of the best ways to break out of that mindset is to remember the tough times you've been through before. We've all gone through something tough in life. And just remembering like what got you through that time.
Are you a teen or adult looking for more happiness in every day and ways to connect with people in your life?
You've come to the right place. Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
And we're the two teens behind Small Bits of Happiness.
We're interviewing Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more.
Throughout all of our episodes, you'll find great conversations, hacks that you can take away and try in your life, inspiration, as well as unique and surprising insights. Today, we are speaking with Amy Morin. Amy Morin is a psychotherapist, internationally best-selling author of, among other books, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, which has been translated into over 40 languages. And we're huge fans of this book. In fact, I read Amy's book a few years ago.
Amy's TED Talk is widely popular and is in fact one of the most viewed TED Talks. Today, Amy is joining us to share how we as teens can become more mentally strong and what not to do. Tips to avoid self-pity, and hacks for receiving bad news.
We are so thrilled to be speaking with her today. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, we are so excited. So to get us started, you are an iconic psychologist, author, and TED speaker. But take us back to the beginning. How did your journey begin?
So, I started thinking I was going to be a doctor, and I was a pre-med student my first day of college, and we had to dissect cats. And everybody in the whole class was really excited to dissect cats except for me. And I thought, maybe I don't actually want to be a doctor. I just like the idea of being a doctor, but I still wanted to help people. So I called my sister, who had just graduated with a bachelor's degree in psychology. And I said, I'm switching my major. I think I'll probably change it to psychology. And she said, if I could do it over again, I would get a degree in social work as opposed to psychology, so that you have a social work license when you are done, as opposed to a bachelor in psychology, which is a little bit more generic. So I switched my major to social work, sort of with the idea of I'll change it down the road. I just wanted to get out of dissecting cats on day 2 of school. And then I fell in love with social work, and so decided to go on to get my master's, and really loved being a therapist. I thought it turned out to be a much better match for me than I know being a doctor would have. I really wanted to be able to help people, but clearly the physical part of dealing with that was not for me. But certainly talking to people about problems and helping them problem solve was a good fit, and thoroughly enjoyed it. And then early on in my career, I went through some losses. My mom passed away, and then my 26-year-old husband passed away. My father-in-law passed away. There was a long series of losses in my life that led me to start writing articles more out of necessity than anything else. I needed a second income when my husband passed away. So I started writing articles just to be able to pay the bills. But one of my articles went viral. It was called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And I got a book deal, and now I get to speak and write about mental strength on a much bigger scale than I did before.
That is so amazing, and it sounds like you've had a very roller coaster-like journey. But what do you think your biggest obstacle that you had to overcome was, and how did you overcome this?
So I would say one of my biggest obstacles was probably my beliefs that I couldn't do a lot of things. And even though I was a therapist, I really thought, I'm doing something that's probably bigger than I even imagined. A lot of people in my family never went to college. Very few people in my family were working in a professional field. So I thought, this is amazing that I get to do this stuff. It never occurred to me that I could write a book, that I could go out there and do this other stuff, especially given the losses I went through. But ultimately, it was the painful things I went through that gave me even more insight and experience and expertise to be able to speak about it in a different way.
We just want to quickly say, check out our happiness wellness products designed by us for individuals of all ages to help you bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our tangible tips and tools. Check them out in the show notes. I think that's amazing because I think a lot of the times whether or not our loss is significant or not, sometimes us as teenagers, we can begin to think, I can't do this, I can't do that, or I've been through so much, you know, I feel bad for myself. And of course we might experience some self-pity, but I absolutely love and admire how you've taken some of the biggest challenges in your life and turned those into incredible opportunities to help so many, like millions of others out there. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, is like, it is what you make of it. And of course, like, that's so awful that you lose people that you love, but at the same time, we can't change or control that. And so to take that and help others is so impactful and empowering. And so you were talking about mental strength and how your books have allowed you to help so many people learn more about mental strength. But I feel like the term mental strength could have different interpretations. So what do you define as mental strength?
I'm glad you asked, because you're right. A lot of people interpret it to mean different things, and sometimes people think it's just about acting tough. Like, if I go through hard times and I don't care, then that means I'm mentally strong. But in reality, sometimes it takes a lot more strength to acknowledge your emotions than it does to pretend like they don't exist. So on a high level, I would say mental strength is about living your best life according to your values and having the courage to do that. If we break it down, it has to do with three things: the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave. A lot of the things we think aren't true. Our brains lie to us. It will underestimate you. It will tell you you can't do certain things. It will exaggerate how bad something is. So as you build mental strength, you learn to figure out whether those thoughts are a fact or an opinion, and you can gather some evidence to think more realistically. The second part is about our emotions. Knowing you don't have to be happy all the time. Obviously, if we tried to make ourselves happy right now, we wouldn't make good choices for tomorrow or down the road. Some painful things are what lead to long-term happiness. So it's about knowing that, yeah, I can manage my emotions. If I'm really sad or if I'm angry, I don't have to stay stuck in those moods if they don't serve me well. I can tolerate being uncomfortable, but I also have some skills to manage my emotions. And then the third part is our behavior. Knowing that, yep, there's days I don't feel like doing something, but I'm going to push myself to do it anyway, or I'm going to figure out how to be productive. I'm going to make sure that I'm problem solving, even when this problem seems really big or really hard. I'm going to keep moving forward and taking action. And when you combine those three things, the way you think, the way you feel, and the way you behave, you can build a strong and fulfilling and really rich life. But we're always a work in progress. Sometimes people will say, well, I'm already mentally strong. I don't have to work on my mental strength. But that would be like saying I lifted weights last week, so I don't need to go to the gym anymore. No, it's something we need to keep working on, because life is going to keep changing. It's going to keep throwing us new challenges. It's going to evolve, and it's up to us to figure out how do we adapt, how do we handle all of those curveballs that life's going to throw our way.
I love that so much, and I love how you compared mental strength to building muscle, because I really do think that it is like a muscle, and the more you work at it, the more that you try to pay attention to your emotions and notice, is this emotion incredibly strong and is it serving me well? And if not, how can I maybe balance it out a little bit more? And just kind of noticing things and focusing on how can I make sure that I'm okay in the short term, but at the same time I'm benefiting the long term, and just kind of balancing those two out. But out of all the things in your 13 things that mentally strong people don't do, what do you think the most important habit is for teenagers not to do?
I would say to not make the same mistakes over and over again. The teenage years are a great time to figure out, how do you do something? How do you solve problems? What are you capable of? What do you want to try? And to put yourself out there and to do new things, to learn about yourself, but to not look at mistakes as the end of the road. Sometimes we think, I tried to do this thing, it didn't work out, so clearly I wasn't meant to do that. Whether it's you were trying to learn how to play the violin, or you wanted to learn how to play soccer. And if you didn't make the team, or you didn't do as well as you had hoped, it's not that you aren't good enough. It just means maybe you made a mistake, but you can learn from that mistake, and how do you do better next time? And this is the case when it comes to, say, a social mistake. You said something and you later thought, oops, I hurt somebody's feelings. I didn't mean to do that. Learn from it. What do you learn from that experience so that in your next social interaction, you don't make that same mistake? Or if you mess up when it comes to your grades, you didn't study enough. Okay, well, what can you learn from that? Or you didn't take something serious enough, or you didn't practice enough for something. How do you learn from that and get better? So often we tend to think, well, I made a mistake, so therefore I'm either doomed to keep making that mistake, or we're embarrassed by the mistake, so we try to hide it, cover it up, or we tell people like, oh, I don't care anyway. I didn't care if I didn't make the team, like it's fine. When we really did. And then you can't learn from a mistake unless you let yourself experience all those uncomfortable emotions and then spend some time thinking about how do I want to do better next time. And to know that a mistake isn't the end of the road. It doesn't mean you weren't meant to be somebody who plays the violin or that you weren't meant to have friends. It just means you messed up, but you're capable of trying again and you can do better the next time.
I think that's so important because there's this funny saying, and I really like it. It's like nothing changes if nothing changes. Like if you make a mistake, but you don't change anything in your approach and you do the same thing over and over, you're not learning from the mistake. But if you make a mistake and you're like, hey, let me take a sec to reflect, what did I do that's actually wrong? What's the mistake rooted in? And then change that or shift it. You might make another mistake, but at least you're moving forwards rather than just staying kind of stagnant. And so I think that that's really, like you said, important to constantly growing into a better version of ourselves. And also knowing that like, if you make a mistake, it's not the be all end all. Because I think as teens, we live in a very fast-paced world where we expect instant gratification at times. But knowing that like, hey, if I want to learn a new skill, I might need to practice for like several months, or it takes several years, and I can't compare myself to someone who I know or who is like online who's been playing the violin for 5 years, whereas I may have just started like a week ago, and that's just not a fair comparison. But I feel like sometimes, even though it might not be totally logical, we do make those faulty comparisons.
Yeah, it's tough not to do, even as an adult. I made plenty of mistakes as a teenager. I still make lots of mistakes. And there's still those tendencies to think, oh, I don't want anybody to know I just messed up, or I don't ever want to feel like this again, so I don't want to try. But unless we do, we don't really learn and grow as people.
I think that's so true. And so back to the topic of mental strength. What are your top 3 tips for teenagers to boost their mental strength?
Ooh, that's a great question. So there's so many different things we can do on a daily basis to say, how am I going to grow mentally stronger? Many of the things only take a couple minutes of our time. They don't cost us any money, and there's really no downside to doing them. But if you stick with them for a while, it tends to help us start to feel a lot better and to grow stronger. So my first one would be to figure out how to name your feelings. If we spent more time just saying, okay, I feel anxious today, then it would take a lot of the sting out of that anxiety. Research will show this over and over again, that when we name an emotion, it reduces the intensity and the duration of it. So sometimes I have people who will create a list of feeling words, because most people, when you say, how are you feeling today? They're like, I don't know, or okay. It's tough to even come up with the language of I'm disappointed, I'm sad, I'm upset about something. So go to Google, print out a list of feeling words. It might just only be a very simple list. You tape it on your bathroom mirror, and when you're brushing your teeth, hopefully in the morning and again at night, look at that list and say, how do I feel right now? And practice putting a name to it, while knowing that sometimes we feel a bunch of emotions at once, and sometimes they seem contradictory. You might be happy that you're starting something new next week, but kind of sad that you're leaving something else behind. Sometimes people will say that, I just finished the 10th grade. I'm really happy I'm going into the 11th grade and I have all these new opportunities, but sad that 10th grade is over. Fine. Just acknowledging that and to get better at it. And the more that we practice recognizing how we feel, the easier it is to talk about feelings, and the easier it is to recognize, how do my emotions affect my decisions today? If I woke up really sad and my friend calls and says, hey, do you want to hang out? I'm probably likely to say, oh, no, thank you, because I'm sad. But yet if I want to boost my mood, the exact thing I should do is probably go hang out with my friend anyway. So the better we get at recognizing our emotions, the better we can get at making decisions. So that would be step number 1. Name your feelings every day. Number 2 would be to then ask yourself, is what I'm feeling my friend or an enemy right now? Because people will often say emotions are either positive or negative. Like excitement's a positive emotion and anger is a negative emotion, right? That's actually not true. Excitement can be your friend, but it could also be your enemy. Like it's really fun to be excited when you're looking forward to vacation. And that can be helpful. But excitement then might be your enemy when it's a week before vacation and you can't concentrate on your schoolwork because all you're thinking about is what's going to happen next week. So it gets in the way. Or anger. Anger is your friend when it gives you courage, because maybe somebody's getting picked on and you say, this isn't right, and I'm angry about it. So you step up and say something that you wouldn't normally say, or do something that you wouldn't normally do. But on the flip side, anger is your enemy when you get mad at your friend and you say something hurtful and you later regret it. So just asking yourself that question, all right, now that I've named my feelings, is what I'm feeling right now my friend or my enemy? Being sad because you lost something could be your friend, but if you're so sad that you can't get out of bed for 3 days, it's become your enemy, and that's when you need to do something else to shift how you feel, which would take us to number 3. So first one was name your feelings. Number 2, ask, is what I'm feeling a friend or an enemy? And number 3 is to create yourself a list of mood boosters. So these are the things that you do when you're in a good mood. When you come home from school, what do you normally do? If you had a great day and you're really happy, how would you spend your hours after school? You might say, well, I listen to music, or I talk to my friends, or I go outside. You have things that you naturally do when you're happy, but you also have things that you naturally do when you're not feeling so hot. When you've had a bad day and you come home and you're frustrated or you're really sad, maybe you listen to sad music. Maybe you just go lay down in your bed and you don't do anything. Or you end up getting in an argument with a sibling, and you don't really do anything that makes your mood better. You do the things that keep you stuck in that mood, and that's what happens to us naturally. We do whatever we feel like doing, and when you feel sad, you really don't feel like doing anything fun. So what I would do is say, let's take a list of all the things you like to do when you feel happy. See if you can come up with 10 things that you would do, whether it's some maybe after school, maybe some on a weekend when you don't have school. And really try to identify even those small things, like I put on my headphones and I clean my room because I'm happy, or I call 3 friends, or I chat with them, whatever it is that you do. And that's your list of mood boosters. And write it down or put it on your phone and keep it handy somewhere. And then when you have a day where you're really just not feeling well and you're not in a good mood, do something on your mood booster list. You're not going to feel like doing it, but if you push yourself to do it, it could improve your mood, because we know that taking action is one of the best things we can do to shift how we feel. That if you change your behavior first, the feelings often follow behind. So if you turn on happy music on a sad day, at first you're going to think, oh, I don't feel like doing this. But after a few minutes, you might find that your mood shifts and you feel a lot better. And then when you feel happier, you might have a much better day. So those would be the 3 things. Identify your feelings, ask if what you're feeling is a friend or an enemy, and then have a list of mood boosters handy. So if your feelings aren't serving you well, you can do one of those things on the list and see if you can boost your mood a bit.
Those are fantastic. And I think that those are, I really think that sometimes when we get into a negative mindset, we feel sad, then we just do those things that keep us feeling sad. I think for me, a big one is when I'm having a bad day, I put on sad music, but then I realize hey, this music is only making me sadder, but if I listen to the feel-good music that I listen to when I'm having a great day, then that will remind me of those feelings. And I think that's a big thing of mental strength, is having those tools in your toolbox that you can when you're having a tough time, you know what to do to feel better, and you actually are willing to do it, and you're practiced in the habit of, hey, I know what makes me feel happy, so I'm going to do that. I know what makes me motivated, so I'm going to do that. I know how to kind of wiggle my way out of a bad mindset, whereas sometimes if you might not have as much mental strength, you might not be practicing or even aware of what to do to kind of boost your mood and get out of a negative mindset.
Exactly. And I also love how you mentioned that looking at emotions, whether they're helping you in the moment or they're not helping you, like a friend or an enemy, because all emotions are a spectrum of how we're feeling, and none of them are bad specifically, but what they might be doing is bad. So just kind of noticing, what am I feeling right now, which I think is so important, because oftentimes we kind of lose touch with what we're feeling, because our emotions and us are kind of one, but we kind of sometimes just pretend we're on different paths, but when really we're walking the same one. And if we kind of avoid it, it can be so hard to find what makes us happy and be in a better mood and a better place. Exactly. So recognizing what we're feeling, and then if it's good or bad, can really help us then get out of that funk or bad mood.
Exactly.
And bad habits are so important to break so that we can start building good new habits. So what bad habits have you had to break in order to become a happier version of yourself? And what advice would you have to give to others to identify and break bad habits?
Another good question. So obviously I write about what not to do, what mentally strong people don't do. And part of that is because I realize that sometimes it's easier just to give up one bad habit than it is to try and develop 100 new good habits. And again, if we took it back to how it's similar to physical strength, I realized as a therapist, if I went to the gym and the trainer told me to work out, like, yes, I will do that. But I'd be really upset if they didn't tell me how my diet affected my workouts. Like, I'd rather not eat a jelly donut and then have to run on the treadmill for an extra hour. And I found that people who came into my therapy office already had tons of good habits, but sometimes it just took one bad habit to keep them stuck. So for me, if I had to pick the one, I come by the whole list, honestly. It's all things I've done and still do sometimes, but I try to monitor. But I think one of the biggest things for me was not giving away my power, which meant I had days where I wanted to say, like, blame other people for ruining my day, stealing my time, wasting my energy, or making me feel bad. And I really had to remind myself, no, those are all things that I'm in control of. I'm in control of how I think, how I feel, how I behave. And there's not a human being on the planet who has the power to ruin my day or hold me back or be responsible for my life. It was up to me to do that. And so even to this day, I have to correct my language sometimes and say, no, nobody made me feel that way. It was my choice to not manage my emotions in a healthy way. So that's something I work on a lot. And I think for young people, that's a great one too, to be able to say, even though as a teenager, you don't have as much control perhaps over certain things in your life because your parents and your teachers and other people have lots of rules and guidelines, but just recognizing that it's still up to you to decide how you think, how you feel, and how you behave, despite whatever circumstances you're in.
That's fantastic because I 100% agree. Like, it can be so difficult, especially as a teenager, to feel like, I think this is why a lot of teenagers struggle, is you feel like out of control and, as you said, out of power, because you have all these ideas and values and opinions of yourself, and what you want to do, but at the same time you still have to listen to those adults within your life, and so it can be very conflicting. And I think that's so important, like you said, to keep in mind, like, it's my interpretation. Like, I get to decide how I view other people's criticisms and feedbacks and guidelines, and like, how are they, like, they're trying to help me, they're coming from a place of care most of the time.
Right.
Really remembering that and just trying to keep that in check.
Yeah, I agree. And I heard this really amazing saying that was like, 90% of what happens to you is in your control and how you react to it, and what you're feeling is only affected by your environment, 10% of like what you're feeling. And I just think that's really powerful because it shows that majority of how you're feeling is affected by how you respond and how you see what they're saying. Because if someone tells you something that could be viewed as constructive criticism, but you take it as a direct personal hit against you, you're going to be overreacting, you're going to get angry, and you're going to feel like this person has something against you, and really they're just trying to help you out. And so just kind of taking something and realizing, is this personally against me? Is this for something that I did? Are they mad at me specifically, or are they mad at my actions? And trying to take it in a different direction.
Exactly. So on that note, when bad news or events come up, like maybe a death, or for a teen, this could be a bad test grade or a rejection of some sort, it can be difficult for us to not succumb into self-pity or spiral into these negative thoughts. So how can somebody maintain a stronger mindset when receiving bad news?
Yeah, bad news is definitely part of life, no matter how old you are, and knowing that you still have choices in how you respond to it. So when it comes to managing our thoughts, sometimes when we get bad news, our mind goes to some catastrophic places that aren't even true. Like, this is it. I'm never going to get into the college I wanted to go to, or I'm never going to get the job that I want, or nobody's ever going to like me, or it's so embarrassing I can't handle failing ever again. And to catch that spiral. So sometimes you could just ask yourself, like, what would I say to my friend right now? I know you'd be kind to a friend if your friend said, hey, I just failed a test and now I'm never going to get into college, I'm never going to get a good job. you wouldn't be like, yeah, you're right. You would say something really kind to them, like, no, you'll do better next time. It was just one test. Don't worry about it. Something like that. Give yourself that same advice. Sometimes that helps us put things in better perspective when you just say, well, what would I say to my friend right now if they were saying the same things I'm telling myself? And that helps us practice a little more self-compassion when we're going through something. And it's also important sometimes to get that second perspective. So with the teens that I work with, I always try to help them figure out, who can you talk to in life? And it might be that you have a coach, a parent, a former teacher, maybe it's an aunt or an uncle, somebody in your life that you can turn to when you're struggling. And it might be different people for different things. Maybe if you have a trouble with sports, you go to your mom, but when you have trouble with academics or you're struggling with a social issue, maybe you go to your grandmother. But just knowing that you have different people in your life who you can talk to sometimes, because it's really helpful to get that outside perspective from somebody else. And sometimes friends are good, but sometimes it's better to talk to somebody older too, who maybe has been through it, or somebody who has a little bit of experience being right where you are now, and they can give you some kind words that maybe you're struggling to give yourself too in those moments.
Oh, I love that, because it's true. Like, we are so hard on ourselves, and I think that really we have a lot of grace for our friends and for the people we love. And so, like, saying, what would I tell my friend in this situation? And like you just said, like, really putting yourself into their shoes for a moment, and that grace, as well as that social support network, is so important. And internalizing your feelings is not going to help you get advice or get insights, and so, like, sharing that with someone that you obviously trust is important.
Exactly. And once you kind of start internalizing things more, it's so easy to spiral, especially into like the why me mindset. So what is your experience with this mindset, and what do you suggest or to do to prevent or exit this mindset?
Yeah, well, I've certainly been there. When I went through bad times in my life, I just kept thinking, like, well, what could possibly happen next? It was almost like I had moments where I was just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And one of the best ways to break out of that mindset is to remember the tough times you've been through before. We've all gone through something tough in life. And just remembering, like, what got you through that time can help you get through something again. So whether it was when you were in the 3rd grade, something awful happened, like, well, how did I get through it back then? I was younger and I didn't have as many skills or experiences. But knowing that maybe back then you talked to somebody, or back then you had a day where you woke up and you said, today is the day where I'm going to tackle this really tough thing. Just remembering that can be helpful in getting through tough times. And also just catching those thoughts as you start to think, there's nothing I can do about this. There's nothing I can do to make the world better. Nobody can help me. When you start having those sort of helpless and hopeless thoughts, to catch yourself and say, what's actually one thing I could do today to make something better? And it might be that you can't fix the situation. If you have a loved one who has a health issue, you can't fix that. But what could you do today? Maybe you're like, I'm just going to send a really nice text message to a friend I haven't talked to in a while. But do something to put some positive vibes out into the world. And it will remind you that, yeah, you can't control everything, but you do have control over some things. And it might just be you're going to smile at somebody and hold the door for them. But just doing those little things will remind you that you still have a lot of power. And even if you can't fix this one situation, you have the power to help other people have the best day possible, if you want to do that. And it's when we take those little actions, and it's kind of contrary to what our brain's telling us. Our brain is saying, there's nothing you can do. You're hopeless. You're helpless. This is awful. But when you take the opposite action and say, I'm going to do something kind or put some kindness into the world, it just reminds you, all right, maybe I do still have the control to create something that would make the world better, if not for me, for somebody else. And no matter how bad things are, when we can't control the situation, we can still say, all right, I can't fix the situation, but I'm going to fix how I feel about the situation. So if a loved one in your family is going through a serious health issue, and you're starting to think, why me? Well, then you say, well, okay, I can't fix their health situation, but I could fix my emotions today. What am I going to do today? And it might just be, I'm going to listen to that happier music even though I don't feel like it, or I'm going to do something kind for somebody else. And when we take those steps and change our behavior, again, it sends the signal back to our brain of, all right, we're not as hopeless and helpless as we think we are.
I love that so much. And I think that oftentimes we always crave control. And I think that if we feel like we're starting to lose that, we might start channeling that into more negative ways. But if we have like a series of things that we know we can control, or even recognizing the loss of control and then saying, what here can I control that's positive? So for example, doing something positive for the world is control, but you're also helping others, and you can also recognize that, and then you feel good about yourself instead of then starting to spiral even more because your control is negatively impacting you. And so then seeking out and even like making a list and writing down, here are all the things I can control compared to the things that I can't. And if I can't control it, I'm gonna have to let it go. I'm gonna have to realize this is out of my hands, and then put all that energy into what you can do, helping the people around you, helping your environment, and just focusing and putting all your energy towards that.
Absolutely. And what I really think is also important to getting out of that why me mindset, I think we all experience this, where something bad happens, we're like, why me? Like, why am I experiencing this? Nobody else has to go through this. Like, my friends have it so easy. But then just remembering, like, everybody struggles, and maybe you just don't know what they're going through. And so this is something that really helps me whenever I kind of start to get into that why me mindset, is like, well, so-and-so is probably struggling too, or actually I know that this person has been through that because they shared that with me. And so remembering that, like, everybody struggles, and it's not just you. It's not like a why me thing. It's like part of life is struggling, unfortunately, but it's like what you do with that struggle is truly what defines how you can keep growing and keep going.
You're absolutely right. And as a therapist, people come in and tell me all of their struggles, and then they'll often say, yet nobody in my life knows this. Even the people who are closest to me would be surprised to know that I struggle with these thoughts, or that I experience these feelings, or that I have a hard time with certain behavior. And it might be their closest friends or their family or their best friend, and they say, we don't talk about these things, and I'd be embarrassed to tell them. Well, so many people are struggling with the exact same things, but yet nobody talks about it because we only want to put the best side of ourselves out to the world. But the truth is, we all experience emotions. It might just be about different things. Everybody experiences anxiety. One person might be anxious about flying in an airplane. Somebody else is anxious about, could be anything from what the weather's going to be, or they just feel anxious about a test. Or somebody who has a lot of money might be anxious about losing their money, and somebody who doesn't have any money is anxious about not having any money. But the emotions are the same. And just knowing that all of the emotions we experience are universal, they're human emotions. Whatever we experience them about is okay too. It doesn't make you bad, because sometimes we judge ourselves and think, well, I shouldn't feel so bad about this. It was just a comment somebody made, or it was just one test that I didn't do great on, and then we shame ourselves for our feelings, and that doesn't help either. So just knowing however you feel is okay. Those things are universal things. We just don't talk about the struggles that we have.
I think that is so empowering, just to realize, you know, everyone here is human just like me, and if I'm going through it, most times it's probably going to be common that someone else will have also gone through it, or is also going through the exact same thing. Because as humans, we all kind of struggle with similar things. We all have the same kinds of emotions and everything. We just might experience it in different instances, but oftentimes just talking about it, being open, is also a great way to also create better connection, because you two now have something in common, and you've been vulnerable with each other, and you realize that you have more in common than you might think.
Exactly, especially with people that you trust, like a family member or a close friend. But thinking back to your teenage self, what is one piece of advice that you wish you could share with your teen self?
Oh, I so wish I would have been brave enough to take more risks. I was incredibly shy, and I didn't speak hardly at all. Even in high school, my English teacher would single me out and say, do you want me to read your paper for you? Because I was too shy to read my paper while everybody else in the class read their paper. And I never argued with that. I was happy to let other people speak for me. So the thought that I would ever become a podcaster and a public speaker was definitely not on my radar. But I would tell myself to take more risks and to be brave and to not worry so much about being embarrassed. That was one of my biggest concerns, is I would embarrass myself. But as an adult, I can say, yeah, I embarrass myself all the time now, and it's not nearly as big of a deal as I thought that it was. It's okay. You'll recover from it. So I would want myself to know that it's okay to embarrass yourself. You'll recover from it. And that nobody likes you because you're perfect. In fact, when you think, why do your friends like you? It's probably because they can relate to you. And what do they relate to? Probably the mistakes and the struggles and the embarrassing things you've done in life. Not that you have never messed up or that you've been perfect all the time.
Oh, that's fantastic. So important to remember that, like, we are so hard on ourselves, but, like, that doesn't allow us to be our truest self. So, like, try new things, and that way you'll learn and grow. And if people judge you, then, I say this all the time, but they're not really meant to be a big part of your life if they can't accept human mistakes that we all, and they probably make too.
And I also
Right.
like thinking in a perspective of, if my friend did this, would I not want to be their friend anymore? Would I constantly bring this up and laugh about it and think about it when I'm going to bed at night and just like constantly think about the exact same thing that they did embarrassing that day? Or would I kind of just say, okay, well, that was kind of interesting, or maybe I would laugh at it, but I would like let go of it very quickly. And so just kind of taking that reflection and thinking, okay, well, they probably don't care as much as I think they do. They probably cared maybe a little bit in the moment, maybe they found it funny or a little bit special, but they're not going to think about it before they go to bed or laugh about it every time that they see me and bring it up consistently for the next 3 years.
It will be a bigger deal inside of our head than it will be inside of anybody else's head.
I agree. So what do you do every day that brings you a small bit of happiness?
Oh, that's a good question. So I now live on a sailboat. So something that brings me joy, I think, is just being around the water. I grew up in rural Maine where there were lots of trees and lots of dirt roads, those sorts of things, and moved onto a sailboat 8 years ago. And now I get to be around like dolphins and manatees. And so what I do every day is just spend time outside, whether it's outside on the deck of my sailboat or I go running and do things to try to be outside and be active.
I love that, because the outdoors really does bring us happiness, and being around nature and
Animals.
Exactly, and exercising outdoors as well. It's just like such a great way to build happiness and build those happiness and resilient habits. So do you have a specific motivational quote that you love and remember? And if so, what is its significance to you?
Oh, yeah, I have lots of them, but if I had to pick one, I would say the one that goes like, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And the reason I love that is because so much about what we predict becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I think I'm terrible at math and I sit down for a math test, research shows I'll perform a lot worse than if I sit down for a math test and think, okay, I'm going to do my best today. Just that slight change in the way that we think about something really affects the way that we perform or the way that we behave. And it's right down to the way that we interact with people. If I walk into a room and think I'm socially awkward and nobody's going to like me, guess how I act? I probably sit in the corner by myself and then nobody talks to me, and then I believe I'm socially awkward and nobody likes me. But if I walked into that same room and said to myself, I'm going to introduce myself to 3 people, I'm going to smile, I'm going to ask people questions and look them in the eye, even though maybe I still feel kind of scared, well, then people talk to me and it teaches me, like, actually, maybe I'm more capable and competent than I think that I am. So yeah, when we change our thoughts and remind ourselves that we can do hard things, I think then it becomes true. So whether you think you can do it or you think you can't, usually you're going to be right.
We can influence so much of our reality just by our thoughts and our mindset. And so I think, like, realizing, wow, I have the power to change this situation for myself, and like actually embracing that is important.
100%, and realizing that you have more power over yourself than you might think, and just making sure that you're trying to influence yourself in a more positive manner rather than self-sabotaging by having no belief in yourself and saying, well, I suck at math, and so I'm just going to not study at all for the math test because I already know I'm not going to do well. And then next thing you know, you don't do well on the math test, and you're like, well, I thought so. And so
it kind of turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy and like a cycle. And so what I think is also really important is like being that friend to yourself, but it's like a really good friend. So you're there for yourself when you like fall down and you struggle, and you like lift yourself back up and you remind yourself it's okay, but you also push yourself. You're like that friend that's like, hey, you can do it, like try new things, go into the room, study for the test, give it your best shot, and like actually motivate yourself rather than just always like cushion yourself.
Exactly. So do you have anything exciting coming up that you would like to share with us? Any goals you've got, events happening?
Yeah, so my 5th book, I have 6 now, but book number 5 was called 13 Things Strong Kids Do, and it's for younger kids, the 8 to 12-year-old range, but it just came out in paperback a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to spend this summer promoting that and working on my podcast. I have a podcast called Mentally Stronger, and I'll keep working on that this summer and keep talking about my books.
Amazing. Well, we love the book 13 Things That Mentally Strong People Don't Do. I read this like 2 years ago when I was like 13, and it was so amazing, and I learned so much from that. So we're very excited, and we're definitely looking forward to checking out more on your podcast and all of that this summer. Where can our audience find you if they want to learn more and keep up?
So my website is called Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com, and on there I have info about my books, my TEDx talk, and all the other stuff that I have going on.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today, and your insights are absolutely incredible, so thank you.
This has been so amazing.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. This has been fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, and thank you so much to Amy for joining us today.
She is so smart and so insightful, and I think that her advice is so like amazing because it's very tangible, it's easy to implement into daily life, and it's very helpful. Anastasia, what do you think your biggest takeaway from today is?
I think for sure my biggest takeaway is that you need to name your emotions. It's so much easier to be able to move forward with your day and to realize that what you're experiencing right now is something that someone else is also experiencing at one point or even right now as well, and that this is what you're feeling right now and it's okay, and your emotions are guiding you. What about you, Mercedes?
I love that so much, and I love what Amy said about like having a list of emotions in the morning, and while you get ready you determine what you're feeling, and then you come back and you check in the evening, and that's so helpful. For me, one of my biggest takeaways was the importance of doing what you know will make you feel happy, because I think sometimes when we get into a negative cycle and we're feeling sad or stressed or frustrated, we don't want to do those things that make us feel happy because we're like, I want to, you know, kind of sit. It feels kind of good at the moment to dwell in your sadness because you're just kind of stuck in this spiral. But in order to break out of that spiral, you have to practice that mental strength of going into your toolbox and remembering, hey, if I listen to good music, or if I go for a walk, or if I call my friend, I will feel happier, and just doing that, and you'll thank yourself later for it.
If you enjoyed this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out and we really appreciate it.
Also, be sure to join our happiness family. It's completely free. We'd love to have you, and you can easily join by following this podcast on whichever podcast listening platform you're on now.
See you next time!